We'll move on now. They'll be setting up some chairs here to the panel discussion portion of the program. If people want to get up and stretch for a minute, this will probably be your best opportunity to do so. And Joanne Montpar, who I had the pleasure and honor of knowing for the last year or so, will be the moderator for a panel discussion. Joanne is professor of psychology and director of the Rosemary B. Fuss Center for Research on Aging and Intergenerational Studies at LaSalle University, a distinctive intergenerational campus that is home to LaSalle Village. Joanne's research explores lifespan issues with special attention to age-related social attitudes and self-experiences of aging. She's a passionate champion of the age-friendly university. Witness the comment that you made. The age-friendly university is a big movement now that's taking root. And it's a global initiative launched by Dublin City University, Ireland, and it's endorsed by the GSA's Academy for Gerontology in Higher Education, as well as the Mass Gerontology Association. Joanne, oh, there you are. So I'll pass the microphone over to you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
A wonderful conversation. Like the only thing we needed is a couple of bottles of wine, right? Wouldn't that have been wonderful to sit around? So what we're going to do now is we have this wonderful panel joining us, and I will introduce each of our colleagues. Some of you maybe even know a number of individuals because we have such a great group of colleagues working on critical aging issues in the Boston area. And so how we've planned to do this is we have crafted a set of questions, and we'll work our way through those questions, but certainly activities like this can take on a life of their own. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of a conversation we all end up having. We will also save some time for questions from you. I know a number of you had your hands up and you didn't get a chance to ask Louise a question, but certainly you can bring that question back. And then Tom will come back and finish everything up for us at the end of the hour. So let me begin by introducing everyone. Our first panelist is Joan Hively. Jan Hively. Jan writes, inspired by the Hopi elder saying, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." Co-founded the global Pass It On network of positive aging advocates with her Paris-based colleague, Maura Allen, in 2013. Pass It On is the third of 3 flourishing peer networks that Jan has co-founded since earning her PhD in 2001 at the age of 69, with the dissertation on productive aging in rural communities. Now a member of the Sloan Research Network on Aging and work at Boston College, Jan came to her encore career after a career in city planning and administration. Welcome, Jan. We also have with us Lisa Krinsky. Lisa is the director of the LGBT Aging Project at the Fenway Institute at Fenway Health. She is a national leader in LGBT cultural competency training for mainstream aging service providers, as well as policy and practice issues impacting LGBT older adults and caregivers. Lisa is a founding member of the Massachusetts Special Commission on LGBT Aging, and she is a featured subject matter expert in the film Gen Silent, which is a brilliant, compelling, and internationally acclaimed documentary about LGBT aging and caregiving. Welcome, Lisa. We also have with us Professor Sarah Lamb. Sarah is professor of anthropology at Brandeis University and a leading scholar of aging and cultural context. As an Andrew Carnegie Fellow selected in 2019, Professor Lamb is currently examining notions of successful aging as they play out differently in North America, India, and China. She is the author of several books, including a volume entitled Successful Aging as a Contemporary Obsession. Her aim is to help people envision more humane possibilities for making lives meaningful in old age. Welcome, Sarah. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Terry O'Malley. Terry received degrees from Amherst College and Cornell University Medical College, followed by a primary care residency at MGH, where he has continued on staff and teaches medical residents and geriatric fellows. Terry has had a long interest in communications among providers of healthcare and support services. And he is currently a member of the Federal Health Information Technology Advisory Committee, and he co-chairs the U.S. Core Data for Interoperability Task Force. Welcome, Terry. So I'm going to have a seat here. Thank you. The first thing we're going to ask our panelists is to give us a reflection, a few comments about what they took away from the conversation that Tom and Louise had about elderhood. So let's start way at the end and ask Jan, if you could lead us off with a reflection.
I guess the first thing is that I really like the word elderhood. It's like neighborhood, whatever. But I did want to comment on the fact that I don't think of it necessarily as a stage. I think of it because it expresses a goal. Because from my perspective, becoming an elder is something that we should be striving toward. The word elder to me, like the Hopi Indian elder that has inspired me, has to do with making sure that we care for the seventh generation beyond us. That to me, that sense of purpose, and it can be that the artwork that I'm doing looks as if it has some value for someone else. It's anything that has value for others. But there is a tending to the garden. I think of Greta Thunberg, for example, as an elder, because I don't think of it necessarily as connected to age. But I do think that because of our wisdom and experience, thanks to the durability of our experience, as we integrate that and become the person that we have the power to become, that is our goal. That's my goal, to be an elder. So that would be one comment that I would make. And I do think that the title of her book is very special, and I'll plan to use that expression from now on, elderhood.
I had many thoughts, one of which was we didn't have nearly enough time for the conversation. So glad we have a chance to continue it now. I guess one of the pieces that struck me was this concept about othering and thinking about it from the experience of the LGBTQ community. We have a lifetime of othering. So this is not a new insult that is coming to anyone to kind of adjust to it. And thinking a little bit then about that intersectionality and about the identities that we hold, and when we have some identities that are revered and respected, and when we have some identities that are demeaned and undervalued, and what happens when all of those sort of come in and mix together. And also reminded that there's an amazing group that is called OLOC, and their title is Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. And this is sort of a social justice and a community building group. And it's old lesbians. It's not older relative to someone else. And they are very insistent and strident about both using the word old, and that when you introduce yourself, you say your name, Lisa Krinsky, where you're from, LGBT Aging Project, and your age. So I am 56. I've just come out to you all. The other thing is I consider myself an emerging elder.
Great, exactly.
So I really, really enjoyed Dr. Aronson's talk and her book. I recommend it if you haven't read it yet. And one of the key messages, as you've seen, which really resonates with the work I try to do also as a cultural anthropologist, is just to help us think of old age in a way that it is okay. It's part of the human life course and the human experience. And I study the U.S. society and culture, as well as India and a few other places through teaching and research. And we are in the U.S. quite unusual to the extent we try to sort of push away old age and hide it and deny its meaning. It's kind of odd and peculiar, really, the extent that we do it. And I try to think about that through fieldwork, chatting with people, old people, and reading also our popular discourse. There's so much discourse these days on healthy, successful aging. And so one place I do fieldwork is buying those books like How Not to Die, Live Young Forever, Younger Next Year. I mean, there's just a ton of those books out there, big bestsellers, and kind of try to analyze the assumptions. And so partly this healthy, successful aging movement I've seen has been very inspiring to many people because it can, in positive ways, because it can help sort of revision how we see aging and old age as something that can be very vibrant and healthy and lively and positive, something that you have control over through personal lifestyle choices, like Dr. Aronson said, exercise, eating well, positive attitude, going and doing things, learning, being active, etc. But partly it is also ageist at its core because it does imply that if you do become frail, then you have failed at aging, at being a successful person, and doesn't well enough teach people how to deal with those changes in life that we all hope we'll get to. We'll get to changes in older age if we live long enough. And I do see in my fieldwork with older people here in the United States that there is a lot of people do. They're very proud of themselves. Like, I'll volunteer for your study. I'm so successful. But yet the people who do experience some frailty or a cancer diagnosis will often then say how profoundly embarrassed they feel. And that, like, oh, I got a cancer diagnosis. I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed I was going to die. I couldn't tell anyone. Or I need a cane. It's so embarrassing. And, it can suck if you used to love to run and now you need a cane or to get cancer. I'm not pretending it's all cheery and easy, but should it be embarrassing? No. So that's one of my aims in my work, and Louise Aronson also conveys in her book really beautifully, and so that's one of my takeaway messages. Just let's figure out ways to make the old age more meaningful in all its parts, its vibrancy and its more difficult changes.
Very interesting. So I'm a clinician, and what struck me that Dr. Aronson, also a geriatrician, how little she spoke about clinical medicine, except for the riff on medications, right? And the striking thing, so again, it just shows that elderhood is not necessarily related to medical care, or that medical care necessarily, and in her book she makes it very clear, necessarily accelerates people through the path of elderhood in ways that are good, right? But the word that struck me, and it's the word that Jan used, and that was purpose. And purpose is not something that makes it into medical curriculum, right? What's purpose? I mean, why is that valuable? That's not like a blood pressure that I can measure. It's not, I don't have a treatment for it. I can't give people purpose. I can't take 3 of these a day. Call me in the morning when you find purpose, let me know. So it's really, purpose in many ways is elusive, and yet it is probably at the heart of elderhood. And so having achieved elderhood, you achieve it with a bunch of skills and capabilities, and to harness those and aim them towards a purpose becomes not only good for you, but good for everyone else. And I think that overall was the message I took from not only her talk, but also her book, which I highly recommend, right? So it's homework that I haven't had to do homework in years, but I had to read the book before getting up here. So I was struck by purpose.
Well, your comments we're going to pick up in some of the questions that we have, but let's start with this question. My background is a social developmental psychologist. I've been teaching a course in adult development and aging for 30 plus years. And there are 2 things that have profoundly impacted how I teach the course. One is that I teach now at an intergenerational campus at LaSalle Village, so I have students between the ages of 18 and 98 in my course. And the other thing that's impacted how I approach some of the issues is that I'm now 65. And so I've aged with this course. So I'm going to use that experience to pose the question to our panel, which is, have your views, insights, or reactions about aging changed as you've gotten older? What role might our own personal aging experiences as members of this aging population, this historic aging population, play in how we frame old age now and in the future? And Louise talked a little bit about that as well. We are part of this change that's happening. So how does that play out in how you've experienced the issues and how you'll see them going forward?
I had rather an extreme example, I think. In 1999, I was ready to do my PhD dissertation, and it was going to be on life work because I was working with young people around Minnesota, which is where I came from, with life planning, beginning in the first or second grade, where they would lay out goals and talk about how they were going to get to them. And that was part of their process. And then a governor, this was all being done with grants from the state of Minnesota around the state. Then the governor that was elected, Jesse Ventura, a wrestler who was pretty ignorant of public administration, appointed a woman who had been the head of his personal PTA in his town as the chairman of the Department of Education. And she eliminated our Office of Life Work Planning and all the contracts that I had, so that was the end of it. So what to do? And I had been working with districts around the state and, really understanding the huge issue of aging because of the fact that many towns in rural communities had a majority of people over the age of 65. What was going on in there? How are they surviving? So I decided to, because I knew how productive many of those people had been, to do what ended up earning my doctorate, which was on life work planning, but productive aging in rural communities. When I started, I'd been part of a panel in which people said, so how long do you expect to live? And I said, well, maybe 80, because my husband had died at 80, and that was the age. And now I saw the results from this survey, and it was so exciting. It really created knowledge, the impact, because these were phenomenally productive people. And it was because that's who they were. That's all there were in that town. And if you own a grocery store and you're the only grocery store in town, you're going to keep it open. If the nearest nursing home is 60 miles away, you're going to take care of that neighbor. You're going to help with the repair. And so over 60% were volunteering, and et cetera. And the wonderful thing was that in the 90% felt good about themselves and felt as if they were in control of their lives and felt this sense of freedom. And then my career is based upon the fact that they also answered a question that said, would you be interested in taking some coursework, education, more education, if it were short-term and inexpensive? And 43% answered yes. So I could take that to the president of the university and say, could I start the Vital Aging Network, which was the first step. And now I'm 88 now, and I thoroughly expect to live. My sister's 98, and my brother's 95. So it's a challenge.
So that's great. So aging gave you the path. It
difference.
opened the door for you.
It was like a new
Right.
world.
So other people, how has your aging impacted your views on aging? What else?
I guess I'll briefly just say that I've also been studying aging since I was, 25 or something. It's been my career's focus as an anthropologist, and now I just turned 60. And I don't want my students to think that the only reason I'm interested in aging is because of personal reasons. So that's just a short answer. Otherwise, I haven't really quite figured out how it's impacted my aging, except maybe it will help me understand even better, my interlocutors, the people I do research with.
Well, so aging, hopefully it comes to all of us. And I think that struck me at one point was, aging is going to happen, and begin to plan for it and to build things into your life that help you to be more successful at it. And probably the most significant manifestation of that in my life is I'm about to move to a new home. It is handicap accessible. It's got ramps. It's got wide doorways. It has no thresholds. It's got grab bars. It's got stair lifts. It's got everything. And my son said, you don't need that. I said, I don't need it now. But, someday I may well. So why not put it in now so it's there if it's ever needed? So I think what aging has done for me is just to begin to plan forward, look forward. And it's not only building in the things that are going to be helpful, it's building in the things like purpose. So it's build in structures that help you become successful at what you want to do, be the best person you can forever. And so
I'm going to pick up on a theme that Lisa talked a little bit about in her opening comments, and that is that aging intersects with a variety of our other personal qualities and background characteristics. So our gender, our race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and that's just to name a few. So what common and distinctive aging issues do you see at these intersections? Because we've been talking about aging as this very general, broad category, but it's very distinctive in how it plays out as we intersect with other categories. So if somebody wants to talk about that.
I'll jump in just a little bit more thinking about that intersectionality because I think frequently the issues for LGBT older adults are a unique perspective on the issues that are more comprehensive for all folks who are older adults and aging. One of the things that I see is that there is a lot of ageism in the LGBT community. Some of it is particularly noticeable for gay men. There's an enormous amount of ageism. If you're over 30, you're done, over and done for. Some of that is also, however, tied to the experience around HIV, and that the idea of, what does it mean to be old? What does it mean to be frail versus what does it mean to be young and healthy? And so it adds an additional layer with that sort of experience and stigma about thinking about, who's old and what does that mean? And also that within our community, we are not necessarily having connections with other generations. And so the opportunity for younger LGBT folks to be interacting with folks along that age continuum can be really important. We've also seen it with some folks that we've worked with in creating and sustaining an LGBT Elders of Color group, because even within that, we've got subsections of identities, and for them, it has been so powerful to be able to come together and to be old and to be Black and to be gay all at the same time in the room and not having to park one identity in order to be privileged to be in the room with others.
I wanted to say that one of the things I've been studying recently is socioeconomic status, income, and so people, I've worked with the elite, well-to-do older Americans. For instance, I want to say actually for a group, if you retire and are healthy, relatively healthy, and have enough money, I have found, just like larger studies show, that some of the very happiest years of your life can be during that phase, where you're just a little less stress, a little more comfortable with yourself, more time to enjoy your breakfast and coffee, etc. But the lower income people that I've been working with in Waltham and subsidized housing units for older people often are much less physically healthy. I'm not a doctor, but I can just see, and then they tell me. And it's interesting also how many people who are of lower income say that they qualify for my study. If I hang up some flyers about an aging study, they might be 60, 62, 65, but the more elite people don't think of themselves as aging and qualifying for an aging study until 80, 85. And if you ask a more elite person how long you expect to live, they'll say 100, 90 or 100. And a lot of the lower income people say they expect to die by 70. And so that's something that we really need to think about as a society. I got to say, though, that some of the lower income people are less feeling embarrassed or anxious about that, though. Sometimes more acceptance of the fact that you can't be healthy forever. Sometimes blaming other people, like structural forces or the difficult working conditions they had, rather than internalizing and blaming myself. Ooh, somehow I failed. I'm not as healthy and fit as I used to be. What's wrong with me? So, there's pros and cons, but it's something that we really need to think about is class. And of course, I study aging in India too. I won't get into all that now unless I have time, but culture is a big part of it too. Just the cultural images about aging really powerfully impact the way you experience it yourself and what you expect out of it.
And
So gender, socioeconomic status, age. There's another group that we haven't talked about, and that's sort of the functionally impaired. You know, someone who's got needs assistance in doing activities of daily living, and that's really age agnostic. And yet, there's this sort of this functionalism within our society that relegates those folks into a different category. And so although there have been changes that are good, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, so I'm looking out here at all the yellow lines at the sidewalks and all the curb cuts that were just recently put in. This is a huge change. 10 years ago, if you were in a wheelchair and you tried to get around Boston, you, at every block, hit a 6 or 8 inch impediment. Buses wouldn't let you on. Subways wouldn't let you on. So if we think about function and the need for accommodation within the structures of our society, then that's another group. And obviously that overlaps with ageism. But it's something to keep in mind, because all it takes for any one of us is to twist an ankle, and we're going to be wanting curb cuts.
Well, I think the point about diversity is really important, because we know as we get older we get more and more different, and I think this also relates back to the comment about public policy and practices that we need to think about with respect to disparities and diversity of experience within aging. Jen?
Hi, I just wanted to talk about I feel privileged to be part of the Sloan Research Network on aging and work. And my passion has to do with productivity and work. So I'd like to just comment on that intersection, because I feel so strongly that this is a moment in time where we need to see a trend, which is the fact that there are many people with inadequate savings who are going to live a long time, and pension reforms haven't happened yet. And in many cases, governments are going bankrupt because of inability. So we're going to need to work longer. And the question then is, how do we get the upskilling and the reskilling that's necessary, especially, for example, with digital skills, so that we empower older adults to be able to feel competent. We also have people who have gotten out of the workforce to care for their older parents or their spouse. What happens when that person dies and they're 60 years old and the workplace is filled with ageism? We need to be able to empower them to get that education that they need. So I think that the whole higher education system needs to be changed so that we can move in and out, and carry a portfolio with us so that we can continuously add new certificates, get our masters later in life, and get some help, public sector help to do that. So I think that there are some really exciting things going on in that arena, and I think it's a big focus for interest.
Really, age-friendly university fits right in there, so it's the new thing that we're going to have to really tackle. We've heard the word throughout our conversations today come up, the word successful aging. So let me pose this question. What does it mean to live healthy after 50? Are terms like successful aging, which is both in the research and literature, scholarly literature, productive aging, positive aging, are they helpful in advancing this idea, or are they harmful in advancing some of the issues around aging?
I'd like to speak to the positive aging, productive aging. I see that there are 6 dimensions of well-being, which provides a goal for each of us, because it doesn't matter what our level of ability is, we can still be able to exercise those 6 dimensions: physical, mental, social, emotional, vocational, and spiritual. We can exercise each of those dimensions, and each one of them is important to our well-being. Yes, that's also environmental wellness, which is important, and economic. We have much less control there, but we can, each of us, really do the job.
Well, but does it set up, though, a certain expectation for some people that as I age, I need to be productive, I need to be successful, I need to be something that maybe doesn't fit in with my self-sense?
J-Lo at 50 at the Super Bowl, right? Everybody's hysterical about the new 50 that she is redefined based on who she is. And so I think sometimes I used to call it the Betty Whiteization. It was like she's 90-something and she's feisty and sassy and, totally with it, right? All those things. And does it give us an unrealistic expectation? How are we successful in our own best way as opposed to this other idea? And what happens if the circumstances of your life don't allow you to be successful? I mean, I love that some of the points that you said are things that we can have control over regardless of the environment we're in. But when you're living in communities that aren't safe, if there's poverty, if you have chronic illness, if you don't have access to affirming and safe health care, then, is that failing aging? And is that your fault? Or is that something that we think about sort of as a community writ large?
Yeah, I guess I see it, building on what you both mentioned, as both an inspiring term for many people, the notion of successful aging, healthy aging. This panel even had healthy aging in its title, and maybe that's why many of us wanted to participate to see how we can be healthy. It can be inspiring for many people. When I first started decided that I would study this and its underlying assumptions, I thought I would be even 100% critical, and I realized I shouldn't be, because many people are enjoying it. I think we are, as a culture, trying to put a much more positive spin on aging, change the narrative around aging in many positive ways. So to not see aging as only a decline, you have to give up, biology is destiny, it's going to suck. The whole healthy aging, successful aging movement rests on this notion that individuals can control, make the most of their life through lifestyle choices, et cetera. And it's something I'll try to keep doing. It's inspiring for many people, but it does, the flip side, the word successful is dangerous because it does imply that you can fail at it, and that's dangerous. So as I mentioned earlier, I think that we should maybe get rid of that term. Healthy might be okay. I think the way Jan described these things that we can all strive for, you could fill them in different ways. So you could be active even in your chair if you needed to, so we need to be really open-minded about the way we think of health or successful. Really, what we're looking for is well-being. We want people to feel as happy as they can with their lives. And one thing I'll say, Dr. Aronson mentioned this also, we should be more comfortable with needing help with dependence. That's part of being human. We don't mind it when our kids need help. And we shouldn't mind it if you're older and you need some help too. And we are really weird as Americans, the way we really, really value independence so much and feel humiliated by any sign of dependence. That is actually unusual cross-culturally. And caring for people and receiving care can be very, very intimate and part of being human and just normal. And I think that's something we should all work for more in our society.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Aronson put it well. She really, I think, would say that successful is an other. It's an othering word. And to be very careful about using it, despite its positive connotations.
I think it's great that we have an intergenerational audience here today, so I'm going to pose an intergenerational question. Some have argued that ageism directed towards young people is as detrimental as ageism directed towards older adults. How do you see intergenerational relations playing out and how ageism is shaped and how ageism may be remedied? So somebody want to speak to their thoughts about intergenerational connections?
That's a public policy, by the way, because the Census Bureau has a measure called dependency, and everybody below the age of 16 and over the age of 65 falls into that category. So you can look at cities, for example, and the record of, which one has the highest rate of dependency. And actually, there's, it's fake. And we have the greatest diversity in humanity. The older we are, the diversity is broader the older that we get, and rather than being lockstep. So I just think this is important, I think, to notice.
I get young students at Brandeis who are terrified by all the anti-aging messages they're getting at such a young age that you better put this cream on, otherwise you'll get wrinkles, and that will be the worst thing ever. And so, yeah, ageism hits us at all ages, and the term anti-aging also is that we accept it is so strange. We would never have a whole anti-woman industry or an anti-any other. Well, okay, but you couldn't label it that. So you couldn't say, I'm going to start the new anti-woman industry or the anti-any ethnic group industry, et cetera. But the fact that we accept that just shows how ageism is so pervasive throughout our society. But one thing that I'm working on in terms of intergenerational relations, it sounds a little maybe like the Evergreen program that happens at BU that one of you mentioned. There's this program called Sages and Seekers, kind of a weird name, but I've been implementing it at Brandeis, and so we have young students and people from the Brandeis Osher Lifelong Learning Institute do classes together. Also, they have speed dating and things like that with each other. And it's been really, really valuable, and the young students love it even more than the older participants. They both love it. The young students feel transformed, amazed, hopeful visions of their own aging, and also just love the historical perspectives that the older people have on various things like dating or marriage, et cetera. And it's just been really, really rewarding. So I think we need more of those sort of intergenerational opportunities in our society.
So one of the things I've been doing recently is changing my language and talking more about multi-generational. I think intergenerational still says me versus you. But we are along a continuum, and so all of us here are part of a generation, and giving folks those opportunities to share that. I think, again, particularly in the LGBT community, over 90% of LGBT folks are born into heterosexual cisgender families, which means that we don't benefit from the kind of cultural legacy that many of us, when we think about the homes that we're raised in, the people who teach us who we are and what our culture is about. And so particularly in our community, I'm really mindful that we've got young folks who don't know their history, who don't have any idea and don't see and have contact with any older adult, meaning they don't see a vision of what their life could become. So one of the things that we do during Boston Pride is that we have this opportunity. We have trolleys that we rent because folks can't walk the long walk, but we have older adults ride in these trolleys, and there's huge love. Also, everyone on the sidewalk is suddenly 12. That may be my getting older. But they can see each other. They can give some love and thanks to the folks who paved the way for them. And they can also see what their future might look like. And so it's important, I think, that we create those opportunities to learn across those levels. And you're right, to benefit that, I also will say, find me a teenager, I need to fix my phone. I don't, the technology divide, I think, is huge. And that's an ageism, right? I assume that somebody 20 can fix my phone. And I assume that I can't, well, I can't. Right. So when is there a reality in that divide? And right, when do we think of it as something that can be empowering? And maybe there's an 80-year-old who can fix my phone, and if someone can help me, that's what I want to have happen.
I always think, recently I've been thinking about how ageism is more acceptable, and we can talk about it, think about birthday cards, think about all kinds of examples of what we freely say in public. The anti-aging piece is part of that. But then I was also thinking that that's a good thing in the sense that it allows us to be able to put it on the table and to talk about it in a way that would be more challenging to talk about it in terms of other social isms. So this leads me to, which I think is going to be our last question because we only have 2 minutes left. What, if anything, can we learn from other social movements to challenge and overturn age bias and discrimination? Is age and ageism different as a social bias than racism or sexism? And if so, how do we address it, or how do we intersect ageism with other issues, social issues that we know are important and compelling?
I do think that this is a moment in time when the word inclusion is perhaps more important than any other in history, because it's with all the issues of immigrant justice and women's gender justice and LGBT, QT, I'm sorry. It's just all, it's out there. We're talking about it. It's wonderful. But it has to, we have to embrace. I love the fact that in this book, Louise Aronson talks about the power of imagination, that's so important as an aspect of wise wisdom with experience, that it embraces the world. And that's exactly, kind of, this is what we have to, that's essential now, because there are so many pressures that demand that we work together at the same time as there's so many pressures for division and violence.
I think we also have yet to have a social movement around aging, right? There's oppression, and then some people somewhere decide that they're going to speak up and they're going to try and push back. And I don't think we have done that yet. People have to stand outside of a pharmacy or the greeting card store and say, these cards are objectionable. All the old, oh, you're over 40, it's all over for you. I mean, I just don't think that we've collectively gotten to that point yet.
It might be partly because we have so much internalized ageism,
Right.
don't you think?
And I think that Dr. Aronson also said, own it, all right? So you are who you are. Be who you are. Be proud of who you are. And I think that's been sort of the root of so many of the other liberation movements. Black is beautiful. Gay is beautiful, right? Old is beautiful. So
But we laughed when he said that. He hesitated too a little.
But be who you are and be proud of who you are. I think that's the important piece.
And we're lucky to have lived that long.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
So look at that. We stopped at exactly the right time. Aren't we good?
But for your
So-
Q&A, right? Is
That's great. So, but we do have time for
Yeah.
questions
If you
from
want
the
to.
audience, and then we'll finish up with final comments from our panel.
Hi. I want to know what the long-term medication effects are on the elderly.
So I'll probably take that one.
Yeah.
Okay. The long-term medication effects. Well, that's a pretty complicated topic. And it's complicated for a lot of reasons. One is that most of the common medications that we use have never been tested in people over the age of 65. And it's only recently, as Dr. Aronson mentioned, that studies out of the National Institutes of Health are requiring sampling of the full age range of people for medication safety. So we've got medications that have never been tested in a group whose physiology is different and whose side effect profile is different. So start there, and you can see that in others we don't know, and although we have lots of evidence to show.
Necessarily be extraordinarily worried about it if you've been taking medications for a long time. It's been helping.
Well, that's true, except that the medication isn't changing, but we are. So there's a chance. It depends on the kind of medication you're taking, but and the unfortunate thing is safe medications don't necessarily stay safe. And common painkillers, for example, ibuprofen, which is fine if you're younger, but it can be really bad. Yeah, but this is over the counter. Same with prescriptions. It doesn't. Again, the physiology is different. So be highly skeptical of medications. As a geriatrician, one of my jobs is to pare down the medication list. So I spend more time removing medications than I do prescribing them.
So it's important for us to ask our doctors about that question, be upfront about it, right?
Yeah, and do I need it?
I don't know.
And they don't know. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's easier to give you a prescription than to talk to you about it.
Hi. I have the next comment or question. Jan, it's wonderful to see you again. I've met you many years ago. I'm working right now with a group called Encore Boston Network, and which is trying to model Shift Online. We want to grow up and be Shift, which is one of the programs you funded. Anyway, the work I'm doing right now, I'm talking to a lot of people who have either been pushed out of the workforce after the age of 50, had to stop working to deal with an elderly parent who was sick, or what other circumstances, and they're now trying to get back in. Some of these folks are 70 years old, 65 years old, and they've had long, successful careers, and they're facing ageism in a big way. So one of the things we're trying to do is to help them learn how to sell themselves as an older person, as an old person, by being proud of their age and talking about what they can bring to the new workforce at their age. And I think one of the employers, one of the big complaints is they look at your resume, see you've got 40 years of experience, and assume you're 60, 70 years old. And you can get somebody to come to work for you much younger, much faster, much cheaper, right? And so we're trying to help with some of the messaging that one presents to a potential employer that talks about the advantage of bringing me into your workplace, what I can do as an older person, things like mentoring younger staff and promoting the skills that you do have. I was wondering, because we were talking about language, if any of you had suggestions about promoting yourself as a 70-year-old prospective employee.
I think you actually hit on a lot of the important points. And our role as mentors, I think, is really important because we bring a perspective. The other thing that we bring is far more reliability and stick-to-itiveness, if I might. And that's not to be pejorative for the younger generations, but they haven't been around as long. And so the perspective comes with time, and that's what we own. And I think that's one of our huge values. And that itself, a stabilizing force in an employment situation is hugely important.
I have a colleague at Olin College of Engineering who studied a small needle factory in the suburban town of Needham here, where the average age of the employees was, I can't remember, 72 or something. It's called Retirement on the Line. But that company actually sees older people as the best employees for various reasons, their reliability. And
I own my own business. I know.
oh, great, okay.
I have people working for me over 70. They're the best workers.
Right. So yeah, you could talk to her and read this other book and get inspiration there. Sometimes older people also, if they already have some savings or they have Medicare or something, they don't always need as much health insurance too. So fewer benefits. I don't know if that's exploitation or not, but it can be a way to sell yourself as well too.
I also would add that, this is one of those issues where, is the responsibility of the individual to fight the practice, or is it the institutional level that we need to address things? And as Louise and Tom were talking, and they talked a little bit about this employment piece, I thought to myself, we have to show people that even if you have somebody who happens to be there for 2 years because they're 85 or whatever, imagine having certain people only there for 2 years. And who they are and what they have to share. So there's ways that we have to figure out how to get employers and business and all of us who might be employers or business or in that job space to think differently about age and talent.
I just want to make one point, because it is the case that the average length of, if I were to hire 2 people, and they were, one of them was 30 years old and the other one was 60 years old. The 60-year-old is more likely to be there 7 or 8 or 10 years than the younger person who is likely to leave within 3 years. So, it's really longevity in the job is actually to the advantage, if we are really looking in a comparative way, for the older worker.
And the data's coming out from research to show that age-diverse work environments tend to be more productive, they're more enjoyable for people, and to figure out how are they leveraging that age diversity in a way that benefits your company. Other questions?
I just have one other question. Appreciate how you are really changing the narrative around aging and well-being, but I was concerned about what one of you, I forgot who, Dr. O'Malley said about gerontology focusing more on the clinical side rather than the well-being side. Do you see any changes coming down the pike so we can attract a lot of new gerontologists to work on the whole body?
And so so gerontology and geriatrics, I'm going to split hairs with you, but geriatrics is actually the clinical side of gerontology. There is, the wellness movement is seeping into geriatrics. It's sort of the analogy, though, I first learned about public health as the story was, a person was finding bodies floating down the river and had to keep pulling them out. And when asked what he was doing, he was saying, and why wasn't he trying to figure out why things were happening? He said, well, I'm so busy pulling bodies out of the water that I don't have time to go upstream to see who's pushing them in. And it's the same thing about wellness. So geriatrics, there are something like 10,000 geriatricians in the country and 50 million folks who are potential customers. So how do you focus that workforce? And it's very different. And wellness is critical. Again, it's how do you keep, who's pushing them in? And it's going to be wellness that's going to keep them out.
And I think also there's some thoughts about, functional ability, right? And so it's the medical end of it, but it's also access to food, transportation, all of those things that get the soft sell. And as a social worker, they're the things that, don't get considered to be as important. And we know things like loneliness. Right now there's a statistic out that the impact of loneliness is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so what are we doing? How do you prescribe social contact and connection for people, thinking that will support them in their aging?
So I see we only have 5 minutes left, and since we're a perfect panel and have been on time for everything, I'm going to ask our panelists each to give us their final thoughts to this question. So we've had a wonderful conversation today around aging. What's the change in public conversation that you'd like to see happen moving forward regarding aging?
I like to think lifespan, everything. Opportunities, because I think that early childhood education, to me, early childhood development is equally important to, and I think that we should be able to think about this all the way. But what goes along with that is what some of you in the audience are expert in, which is coaching, mentoring, life work planning. We need to encourage young people to be doing that. It's active, it's experiential. We need to be sure that we build in mid-ternships along with the virtual learning or the classroom learning. Same thing with young people. And I live on Cape Cod. We're doing an intergenerational model UN in 2 weeks. And thanks to having the Greater Boston United Nations Association, which will be very helpful to you in thinking about doing one in your community. Ours is going to be on food security. We match up and represent a country, each of us, 8th graders, 11th graders, and an older adult. That kind of deliberate interaction on issues of our time is such fun. And it's, to me, what we're talking about. It's involving people of all ages. And I just want to say, Joanne, that if other people aren't aware of the LaSalle community, which is built on the LaSalle campus, where when you go, there's a waiting list, I believe, of people who want to live there. when you live there, that means that you also sign up for a physical fitness program, that you do volunteering, and that you'd have some education program going. And, you know, that's what our retirement community should look like. As Gloria Steinem said last week, when she was 82 years old, she said, my life is my work. She said, retirement? That's ridiculous. I'm not going to retire from life.
It's hard to follow that one. It was something just struck me as I was thinking that the importance of balance, right, of what is positive about aging, also recognizing the things that are more negative. We have spent a good deal of time here today talking about aging and growing older, and we have not talked about dementia once. And is that, you know, overlooking something that's significant and important? Yes. But it also hasn't precluded us having other kinds of conversations that maybe we wouldn't have had opportunity to talk about other aspects around growing older as well. And so I think holding those balance, thinking about the legacies that have been given to us and the legacies that we can offer to folks who come after us, I think is also incredibly important. And so I ask each of you, try and think of 3 things that you really value about the stage of life that you're in right now. Push back on the internal ageism we carry with us. I can't see as well with my glasses, right? Think about what you really own and value and how you can continue that kind of thinking about sort of appreciation for where you are in life, and think about what that will look like 10 years from now.
That's nice. I was at a yoga class the other day, and the teacher, they often say, don't compare yourself to the people around you. You know, you are who you are here on this mat. But she also that time said, and don't also compare yourself to your earlier self, your earlier body. You know, be here now. So I thought that was really nice advice. Also, I'll close by recommending Ursula Le Guin's collection of essays that she wrote in her 70s and 80s called No Time to Spare. Some of you may have read it. And one thing, it's just full of insights and wit. One thing she comments on when people say to you, you're like, oh, you're not old. Oh, you don't look, oh, you're 80. Oh, you don't look 80. Oh, you look so good. She said, you know, don't tell me all that. I am 80. And she says, to tell me my old age doesn't exist is to tell me I don't exist. Erase my age, you erase my life, me. So the message we've all been saying, we should all own our age and make it acceptable and normal with its good and bads, and make it meaningful and vital as possible.
And so let me close then with the word inclusion, which again Jan used. And inclusion not only means welcoming someone into your group, it really means, and I think for us in the room, pushing out to be welcomed in other groups. So you can't sort of sit back and passively wait for someone to say, oh, we're going to include you. You know, you have to step up, move out, and do it. And I think inclusion is going to be the key for society going forward. We need every part of society to succeed.
Well, it's only Monday, but I hope you will all go home tonight and get that bottle of wine and have this conversation with your family and friends about aging. But I also would like to invite you back to BU on April 27th for the Massachusetts Gerontology Association Forum on Aging. There was a handout on the table describing some information about that, and I hope you'll join us again for that conversation. So thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. I had a great time. I hope everybody else had a great time and learned something. Thank you. Perfect. We're at 0 again. The stars have lined up.
You just verified that you're perfect. I've known that for a while.
All right.
Before you all take off, thank you very much for coming, because without you here, it would have been fairly lonely for us to sit here and talk to ourselves. And thanks to all of our speakers. Louise is no longer here, but she's not, that's not the way to put it. She's over at the Weston Seaport doing TEDBed. Thanks for all coming. Thanks for the speakers. Thanks very much to CitySpace for giving us the opportunity and the platform to do this. As I said, their new branding is what's happening is here. And what's happening is we're all aging, and we're all here. So maybe that's the good news of the whole thing. I just want to mention that this is the first in a series of 4 programs, with a 5th being added that will take place. The next one will take place in the fall at Boston College, the Center for Aging and Work. And the title of that program is The Protective Power of Purpose: Work, Service, Caregiving, and Learning, namely meaning, making a difference, and a positive attitude at years to life. There may be an interim program. We're working with the Massachusetts eHealth Institute. They've asked us to consider putting on a program about aging and caregiving technologies, and that might be in the September-October timeframe. You'll also receive an email, a survey Joanne will send out, and we very much would appreciate you sending it back. It'll be short and sweet, and send it back because we'd like to get your feedback on that. On a personal note, I sort of was in on the conception of CitySpace, and I couldn't be happier and prouder to see what WBUR has done. When I joined BUR in 2000 in various ways, I've always thought of it as a public good. Namely, it builds social capital, and certainly CitySpace is an element of that. Thank you very much to the staff for all the support. Thank you, Alex.